Welcome back to It's an Inside Job podcast. I'm your host, Jason Lim. Now, this podcast is dedicated to helping you to help yourself and others to become more mentally and emotionally resilient so you can be better at bouncing back from life's inevitable setbacks. Now, on It's an Inside Job, we decode the science and stories of resilience into practical advice, skills, and strategies that you can use to impact your life and those around you. Now, with that said, let's slip into the stream. Well, welcome back, dear listener, to the top of a fresh new week and a fresh episode. This week, I have another interview lined up for you guys. And I think especially you administrative professionals will really like this. I am very honored and privileged to have Lucy Brazier, OBE. Now, what is OBE? Well, that is an award bestowed upon certain individuals by the Queen of England, and that is the Order of the British Empire. But an even more important question is, who is Lucy? Well, Lucy is one of the world's leading authorities on the administrative profession. As CEO of March Publishing, which specializes and publishes the Executive Support magazine, Lucy's passion is for the assistant role to be truly recognized as a career and not just a job. With access to the most forward-thinking, passionate, and knowledgeable administrative business leaders in the world, as well as personally meeting and speaking to literally thousands of assistants over the last 10 years, Lucy's knowledge of the market and what assistants all over the world are facing on a day-to-day basis are second to none. And it was in 2021 Lucy was awarded that OBE award in recognition for her services to office professionals. And with that said, let's slip into the stream and meet Lucy Brazier. Well, Lucy, thank you for joining me on It's an Inside Job. I really appreciate your time, and I know there's going to be a lot of expectant listeners ready to hear our conversation. So thank you for joining me. I was wondering, maybe we could begin by you introducing yourself, what you're about, and what your current focus is.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's really wonderful to finally meet you face to face. However, let me fill you in a little bit. So I am Lucy Brazier, as you said. I'm the CEO of March Publishing. We publish Executive Support magazine. We put on various conferences. But basically, at the heart of what we do is that we advocate for assistants, for administrative professionals globally. It started out as a magazine, but I realized very quickly that it was a market that was made up of about 500,000 people. It's a fifth of the world's working population. It's 98% female, and most of them are undervalued and not utilized properly. And therefore, yes, we obviously have the commercial side of the business, but I've spent an inordinate amount of time traveling all over the world and talking to businesses and to executives and to HR people about how to best utilize their assistants, how to make sure they can get good return on investment from them, and to really change the mindset to make sure that support isn't seen as something that sits outside of the core business, but which is absolutely at the heart of it. And for that, last year I was awarded an OBE, which, if anybody doesn't know what that is an Order of the British Empire, which comes from Queen Elizabeth, for my services for office professionals. So I think the stuff that I do, which is advocacy, is probably overtaken what I do personally rather than the commercial stuff. But I have a team now who does all that stuff.
I've had the privilege and honor working with administrative professionals such as yourself over, I guess, the last decade, if not more. And I agree with you. They are an unappreciated profession, but they are what I think is almost the glue. It's almost the cohesive unit that holds a lot of organizations together. They are the linchpin, I guess, is the best word I can come up with. And I think your magazine and the support and the advocacy you do is so important to have that voice to speak to that, because yes, it's 98% female, regardless if it's female or male. There is the underappreciation. And so I guess where I'd like to begin, as we've talked sort of just off camera, it was about that this podcast is focusing on how to face adversity, build resilience, and well-being. we are now, I don't know, a few months post-pandemic. I was wondering what has been your perspective, how the pandemic and lockdowns and the such has affected the profession from your personal experience.
I think it's totally about mindset, Jason, because I think our assistants were falling into two totally different categories. There was one lot of them that were going, oh my gosh, I've got so much to do. People have been let go, people have been furloughed, but they haven't let us go. And therefore, my workload has increased enormously, and quite a lot of it's stuff I've never done before. So I'm now feeling really overwhelmed. But actually, that is reflective of what happened 12 years ago when Lehman's went bang and we went into the last recession, which is the only thing that I can compare it to. And so the message that I'm giving those people is hang on to your hats, because last recession, what we saw was that it changed the entire profession and the way that the assistants were viewed, and created huge opportunities for them to step into being more strategic and to be doing a more interesting role. The other half of them are going, I don't know what I'm meant to be doing. Nobody is telling me. I feel invisible. I feel like we're going to come out of this and they're going to say, what the heck were you doing during COVID? In fact, what do you do? And they were feeling very nervous, and some of them very emotional about that. And I will say to that group of people, with love, because I'm probably the only person who can, get a grip. And I do explain to them what I mean by that, which is that their executives are in an unprecedented situation also, and I hate that word, but I can't think of a better one, in that they are out there trying to save the world, trying to create a new world of business, in some cases trying to save the business, but also trying to keep everybody safe. And so when the assistants come and say, I don't know what to do, what would you like me to do? They go, we don't care, go do the thing, whatever it is we pay you to do. But in some ways, I feel like COVID has created a situation where there has never been a better opportunity for assistants to really prove their worth, because they are the chaos tamers. They are the ones who take things that need to happen and they make sure that it's unraveled and that process and procedure is put into place. And that is what business needs right now. But also the executives really need their time freed up so that they are able to get on with the thing that they are paid to do. So it's never been more important for the assistant to take things away from them that are administrative tasks so that they can get on with that. So I keep saying to them, everything just changed. So what is one more change? This is the best opportunity you are ever going to get, because it's a perfect storm of coming out of the last recession with all the additional responsibility of artificial intelligence and the fourth industrial revolution, taking a lot of the very boring stuff away from them, and COVID colliding to mean that they are far easier going to be able to step into the more strategic role, which is what they've been wanting forever. It's what they all tell me. I know that I could do so much more for my executive. I know I could be so much more useful. The thing that drives them crazy is that nobody appreciates what they're capable of. So they need to take this opportunity to show what they really are made of, to step into the more strategic, to step into more process-driven things, and make sure that the business can see what the return on investment is for them.
I think you've made a lot of really salient points there. So if I may just rewind and kind of parse it apart, so untether some of the wisdom you've just shared. You know, I see, because you're coming from a very coherent mindset, seeing sort of the bigger picture and seeing things into context and comparing it to what happened 2007, 2008. But part of what has happened with a lot of professionals is that there's that when the pandemic landed and everything went sideways, people lost a sense of autonomy, a sense of agency, of control. They lost a sense of certainty what to do. And in the midst of the maelstrom, in the midst of the storm, sometimes it's hard to gain the salient perspective that you have. And so what would you specifically suggest to people, sort of like nuts and bolts in the middle of the maelstrom? How do they gain a sense of certainty? How do they gain a sense of autonomy over, and as you well said, an unprecedented situation? What has been your experience that you've heard others do to kind of gain that control and autonomy and sense of agency back?
I think the main thing is communication. With assistants, it all falls down, and I'm sure with most other business people too, when the communication isn't there, but particularly when you are looking after somebody else. You've got to take care of yourself because you've got to take care of them, right? And what I am suggesting to them is that they look at a metaphorical pile of work and say, well, I can take this, and I can take this one, and I can do this one, and you can have this one, so that they break it down into manageable chunks. But also, I think that really within the businesses, executives don't always make themselves available to talk to the assistants, and it's really going and having a conversation which says, I have got some ideas around how I can make you more effective, and I would like to talk to you about that. So make it about the executive and make it about the business, and then maybe choose 3 things that you think you would like to be doing differently, and then talk to the executive in terms of what it is that is going to do for them and for the business. You need to understand what the executive's goals are so that you can work with them to get there. And I think this communication probably that comes out of that meeting that should be happening on a daily basis, to check in, to say, where are we? What is happening? What are we trying to achieve? Because I think the goals will change quite often, and the priorities on an hourly basis at the moment, not even a daily or a weekly or a monthly basis. So many assistants don't have that daily meeting. I think it's one of the core things to sit down and to have that conversation with the executive on a daily basis, even if it's just 10 minutes. And 10 minutes to an exec will be heaven. Because if you say you want an hour, to them, an hour of detail is like hell. So if you have 10 minutes every day, you can actually get through a huge amount of stuff. But don't just communicate by WhatsApp and by email, which I know a lot of them do, because the written word can take on a tone when you don't mean it to. And actually, far better, we know, don't we, that communication is 58% body language, and then there's a whole heap there that is about tone and pace and picture, voice, and then it's only 7% that is the actual words. So if your communication is the majority of it, face-to-face, get onto Zoom, get onto Teams, if you can, and talk face-to-face so they can see what's going on, and so that you can do that 10 minutes and come out the other end knowing what your priorities are for today, because that is but bringing it back into bite-sized chunks. And then if you can't do that, pick up the phone. That's your second best option, so that they can hear your tone. And then if really they won't talk to you, then you have to use email. But ideally, if the trust and respect is there, that there should be in this relationship, that conversation every day is vital, I think, for keeping everything under control. And that's the thing with COVID, isn't it? I think so many of us felt like we were out of control. And the real thing that hit it home to me was that I was talking to a business last week who was telling me that out of 35 assistants, they had 5 vacancies, 8 off sick, and another 6 that they were worried about. And I was saying, well, what is that about? And he said to me, well, I think that over COVID, most of the assistants felt they had a duty to step up. It was a kind of, we're all in this together and we've got to get through it. And therefore, the executives were used to them being on call far more than they were before. And of course, a sprint like that is possible for a short period of time. But you drag that out over 3 years, and now they're not sure how to extricate themselves from that and to go back to how it was before. And they're burning out all over the place. So somehow we've got to work out, and we are right in the middle of working it out, of course, what this new world of work looks like and how we're going to keep all of our people safe and make sure that they are not getting overwhelmed with that amount of work because it's too prolonged an amount of time that they're being expected to do it.
Well, COVID has created a brave new world, and, you know, the rules of the game have shifted a little. I mean, there's still some of the old legacy there, but as you said, it's about mindset. It's about taking a coherent and a reflective way of looking at it. And what I hear you saying, Lucy, is that, you know, these professionals, they can rewind, even though uncertainty has a pile of uncertainties there and the lack of autonomy and control was there, is to sometimes to take ownership. It is to take responsibility over what it is, because generally they know what to do, but in all the uncertainty, maybe before COVID, there was a lot of communication with their with their bosses and with their chiefs in a sense. But a lot of the times their bosses are running around trying to do other things, trying to save the company, trying to focus on priorities and strategize and what have you. And I think what you said is by them listing three things, being articulate what they need to focus on, then line that up with the goals of the executive. And 10 minutes, a lot can be communicated in 10 minutes. And so I think that's very important. To overcome rumination, overthinking, and this sense of burnout that can creep up on anyone is to find out, okay, what do I control and what are the certainties? And also, as you said, it's to take ideas and then translate them into action. Because once we invest effort and action, well, our confidence starts to go, because then we think, you know what? I do have some control over the situation. And so I see a lot of what you're saying, how that can impact people, because I see that across professions, because I have the luxury and the privilege to work across professions. But as you said, you're all over the world. And so this is not just something in the UK or Anglo-Saxon countries. This is across the world as human beings. These are the advice you would give across different platforms, I presume. And that's something I see a lot in your publication in the magazine, Executive Support Magazine. There's a lot of focus on that. I was wondering.
There is. The other thing that I would say about that, just very, very briefly, is that it helps to build trust. If you go to your executive and you take three ideas of things you would like to do slightly differently, or things that you feel that you would like to take from them so that they're not having to worry about that anymore, so they can get on with doing what they're paid to do. Don't do any more than three, because otherwise you are going to get confused, and so are they. But if you take those three things and you deliver them immaculately, what then happens is you build trust. So next time you go and say, I've got an idea, then they're liable to say, yes, that's okay. So over a period of time, that trust and respect is built, and therefore you're far more working in partnership rather than, to me, it's almost, I always visualize it like an arrow, and the executive has this kind of goal that they've got, and they go on an emotional journey in order to get to the goal that they need to get to. But so often the assistant is running outside of that arrow or behind it, whereas where they need to be is right in the middle of it with the executive, providing the support, the admin support, to make sure the executive gets the goal done.
Welcome to Practical Wisdom for Leaders, the podcast where we help you become a great leader. I'm Dr. Scott Allen, and each week I engage with world leaders, senior executives, nonprofit trailblazers, and professors from universities around the globe. We explore all aspects of leadership: executive development, personal growth, bad leadership, women in leadership, decision-making, and so much more. Tune into Practical Wisdom for Leaders for critical insights to help you lead and live with purpose.
Very well said. Very well said. Because I think also, when these administrative professionals can get stressed, there may be a question of psychological safety where they don't feel they have enough communication, that their boss is not clarifying expectations or telling them what they should do. And so they lose exactly where they are on the map and what they have to focus on. But I think a lot of the times, like many of us, if we just step back, as you said, take that reflective mindset and ask yourselves, what is the meaning I'm giving to this situation? And if you broaden the context, as you said, Lucy, is that, my boss, he or they're running around trying to settle things and dealing with strategy, and they're trusting me to deal with all the small stuff that helps everything to run smoothly. I'm pretty much oiling the cogs in the machine. If these administrative professionals step back and ask themselves, what is the narrative I'm assigning to this situation? Because a lot of us are running by a negativity bias, and that's just a natural part of our wetware, our programming, is to look for dangers, to look for hazards, look at all the bad things. But if we step back, as you're suggesting, broaden the context and ask ourselves, okay, my boss, he or she's running around trying to do this. I need to step back and ask myself, what do I control? Where can I create certainty? And what are the three things I can have to create time and opening to help them to achieve what they need to achieve? And as you said, it builds trust that I'm also an independent person, that I can run, that I have a level of autonomy to do what I need to do. Is that what I'm understanding you're communicating?
Yes, absolutely. And for the executives, I would also say that learning to use your assistant properly is time management 101. And that is a great stress reliever. I always say to the assistants, and you mentioned time in there, that they should be thinking about themselves as a gatekeeper of time, not a gatekeeper of people. So if you look at how much your executive earns an hour, and then you spend your time thinking, well, the business has employed me to make sure that every hour of their salary is best spent. Mm. And then you start going, well, could this be a 30-minute meeting instead of a 45-minute meeting? Or if I took this away from them, it would give them back this amount of time. That is what the assistant adds to the bottom line. And as an executive, quite frankly, where businesses are saying, we're making a cost saving, we're getting rid of the admins because you can do your own expenses, you can do your own travel. You can, but should you? On your salary, should you? It's far better, actually, to have somebody doing that stuff for you who is paid a lot lesser salary per hour so that you can get on with concentrating on the things that you really need. And for me, the fact that I didn't know how to use my assistant properly resulted in me having a breakdown in the end, because I was in the office all the hours that God sent, trying to do things which actually, if I had understood how to take my assistant and to use them properly, I wouldn't have been in that position. I would have given her all sorts of stuff to do that she was highly capable of doing. But most managers don't get management training until they're 46. That's the stat. And so that's a whole heap of us wandering around with no clue how to manage people, let alone our assistants. But I think understanding what you can use your assistant for and how to do that is one of the best time management tips that I could ever give you.
In the next part of our conversation, Lucy talks about the burnout she felt in 2010 that shut her down. She talks about all the hours she was clocking, the long commute, and the conscious effort to actually ignore the feelings of her body and mind that were trying to signal her to slow down. Until one uneventful day, her brain just decided, hey, Lucy, you're not going to shut you down. I'm going to shut you down. And that began a journey. It was a shifting point in her career. And it wasn't an easy sojourn. There was a lot of rough rides, a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. But she slowed down. She reflected on the time that burnout gave her. And she reframed that burnout in a positive light that triggered her on a whole different trajectory. And you talked about burnout yourself. A lot of people are going to look at you. You sit at the top of the sort of the profession with the publication and your CEO and a founder and such. And everyone's going to think she's got her game together. And you do have your game together, but that wasn't an easy road to walk, as I understand. Perhaps you could speak, more to the burnout or you hitting the wall and how that affected you and what did you learn from it?
Thank you. Yes. Well, I've been in publishing since I was 18. I started at a local paper. I'd worked for a couple of the national press in the UK. I got into management really quite quickly, and I was one of the youngest publishers in the UK when I got to that level. And in the end, I ended up working for a company where I was looking after about 80 staff. We looked after 13 magazines and all the different events that went alongside that. The budget was about 94 million. And we were at year end, and I had spent months traveling in every morning on a train at 7 a.m. and quite often not getting home till 10 o'clock at night. Between us, my husband and I have 7 children. And I was aware that for a little while, I was traveling in every morning thinking, I can't do this today. But, people kept saying to me, are you all right? And I'd say, yes, I'm fine. I'm fine. And I really wasn't fine, but I don't think at that point I'd even admitted it to myself. And this particular day, I walked into the office and nothing of any consequence happened. It wasn't like I had a row with anybody or there was a big problem. I just walked in, I opened my computer, and it was like my brain had said, well, if you're not going to stop, I'm going to stop you. and I couldn't think of a thing. I have no clue how I got home. I know that I put my head round my boss's door and said, I'm leaving. I will contact you when I get home. And I went straight to a doctor because I was in such a state. And he signed me off for 5 weeks and said, go home and sleep. You're exhausted. And he put me on some very strong medication. And for 5 weeks, I was like a zombie. And when I came out the other end of that and I went to go back to work, they said, we have restructured. So I went from a 6-figure salary overnight to nothing. Now, very, very luckily, later on down the track, we had a year's salary paid by that company to me. And I took some of that money and started Executive Support Magazine, or Executive Secretary Magazine, as it was at that
back
point.
in the day. Yeah.
Yeah, because I'd owned a newsletter forever. And my husband actually said to me, look, the doctor has said you're never going to work at that level again. There was a bullying element in there. There was all sorts of things. And you know, publishing can be a real rat race, and I'm not a rat. So that was part of the problem. But it was something when I first started out that I thought, well, I can do this very gently from my kitchen table. I know how to put a magazine together. I know there's a need for it because I'd owned the newsletter since 2003, but I'd always wanted to turn it into a proper magazine. And it did start very gently, but about 4 months in, I got invited to speak in Milan at an event. And I went to that and looked at the assistants there thinking, oh my goodness, they're so passionate about their profession, but actually they're not happy. They're really not happy. And somehow they didn't feel like they fitted in their businesses. And that resonated with me. I have worked in publishing forever, but I am not your typical publishing person. I'd always been really successful and I'd always moved up the ladder very quickly and I was on a very good salary and all that stuff, but I didn't feel like I fitted really with a lot of the other people that I was working with. So that resonated. And then a little while later, a couple of months later, I went to an amazing training with the late Susie Barron-Stubley, who was at the time the top trainer in the world for assistants. And there were 14 assistants who were some of the top ones in the world there. It was a retreat. And I came away with about 70 ideas for articles, but also thinking the problems I saw in Italy are exactly the same with these really top assistants in the UK. So that kind of got me thinking, what next? That year I did four events. The year before COVID, I did 183 events in 42 countries. And I will never burn out like that again, because this is not just my work. This is my joy. It's my passion. I have learned that I need to follow the 3 very simple rules of if I'm tired, I go to sleep. If I am eating, it needs to be healthy. And I walk every day. My office is 35 minutes away from my house. I actually live in Spain now, and I walk along the seafront every morning, which is really, really beautiful. And that gives me my hour and 10 minutes of exercise a day. And it means it's actually far more about my mental health than it is my physical health, although it's good for my physical health too. But, you know, food needs color. You need to eat a rainbow. And if you're eating brown food most of the time, it's probably very bad for you. And staying in hotels all the time like I was and not watching what I was eating and just living that lifestyle where I was eating at 10 o'clock at night every night and going to sleep and not being able to sleep. And, you know, it's just being kind to yourself and understanding the signs as to where it's getting too much and pulling yourself back and saying, no, actually, I'm not going to do that because it isn't worth my mental health.
Well, I think physiology and psychology, they cannot be separated. One influences the other. It's a symbiotic relationship and it communicates. And so, as you said, you know, sleep, nutrition, and fitness, those are 3 things that we need. But I think another thing that you also mentioned is that trust. We need to have social, healthy, professional, functional relationships. And that's part of that dynamic to feel that we have it together, that doesn't lead over the edge. If we may rewind back to burnout because of the overwork, because what I understand what you're saying is that when someone asks you, how you doing? You're saying, I'm okay. And so you, at some point, you didn't really process the emotions, process the thoughts, process the buildup. And as you said, at some point, your brain just said, okay, you're not shutting yourself down, Lucy, I'm shutting you down. And then you went on a 5-week hiatus. Some of the professionals that are listening to this podcast right now might be in that stage of burnout. they may have already burnt out and they are lying on their couch listening to this podcast, or they're doing something where they just can't process. And in the middle of that maelstrom, in the middle of that storm, they may feel this is going to go on forever. What would you advise people in the middle of a burnout right now? Not entering the burnout, but they are smack in the middle of the burnout, and they might think, is this going to last forever? What advice would you give for someone who's come out on the other end and has built something that they're joyful and passionate about?
Take it steady. I know that sounds really easy, and it's not, but I think being true to yourself, and rather than rushing, look, I had 7 kids. I had 3 of them in private school. Losing that salary was terrifying. But I also, somewhere in the middle there, realized that it was an opportunity to get off the hamster wheel and to look at what I really wanted. And so rather than panicking, I would breathe and I would think, what do I really want? This is probably the only opportunity in my life I'm going to get to recreate my life in the way I want. Because part of the reason I kept saying I'm fine is because I had so many bills to pay. You just don't feel you can get off that hamster wheel and say, I'm not fine. And so to me, it was about taking a step back, looking at it, really just, I suppose, actually, I wrote myself 3 lists. I wrote a list of things that I would like to do, so kind of job titles. I wrote myself a list of things that I felt that I was really good at. And then I wrote myself a list of things that I still wanted to do in my life. And then I looked at the 3 of them and thought, where does that sit? Now, I love publishing. As a kid, I'd always wanted to be up on stage. My parents are both theatre people, and, I sang a lot and danced a lot and did all that stuff you do as a kid. And I actually sang in wine bars for a year until I realised I wasn't quite good enough to make it. I love my writing, and I wanted to travel. Now, if anybody had said to me that would be my job and that I could do all of that in a job, I would have looked at them and gone, really? But also, 12 years ago, when I was so ill, if you had told me at that point that I would be personal friends with Nelson Mandela's assistant and Obama's assistant and Oprah's assistant and Richard Branson's assistant, and that I'd be traveling all over the world speaking in front of, my biggest audience was nearly 3,000, and I keynoted at the 2 biggest conferences in the world for assistants, I would have clearly said you were mad. But I think it's that thing of, there are things that you don't know about yourself and nobody else knows about you either, yet. And it's about giving yourself the opportunity to recreate and reframe what it is that you're doing. And sometimes when you're that ill, that's hard. But that's why I'm saying take it steady. You don't have to do it now. Just give yourself a chance to breathe and to work out what it is.
I think that's very solid advice that you speak of from coming from experience. And it's not just something you read. This is something you've lived and breathed, and you've come out on the other end. And it is, we get bruised and buffered psychologically when we have burnouts. But what I hear you saying is that the burnout was a wake-up call for you. In that wake-up call, as you took it steadily, you had to recuperate. But as you recuperated during those 5 or 6 weeks and beyond that, you started to slow things down in order to speed things up. And what I mean by that, you started reframing or giving new meaning to it, that, okay, maybe I'm not a rat made for this rat race. I don't want to be on this hamster wheel anymore. And maybe this was a wake-up call. It was forced wake-up call, but it was something that drove you to take on a more healthy lifestyle in the sense of following your passions and your joy, to realize your talents and how those talents can benefit other people. But what I also hear is that you started taking on a more physical or physiological healthy lifestyle, eating properly, sleeping better, and obviously moving to Spain where there's sun and sand and surf is And it's also a very good choice. I'm not.
But Jason, what I should say is that it doesn't mean that it's all fun and games. It doesn't mean that it's all gone smoothly since then. Obviously, starting a business has moments where you're terrified. And I have to say, I was really, one of the people that I work with very closely is a lady called Anne Hyatt, who was Jeff Bezos' assistant and who then went on to work for Marissa Mayer and finally became chief of staff at Google. And she told me that Jeff Bezos says that for an entrepreneur, there are only two states. One is being terrified and the other is euphoria. And that made me feel a lot better because if he's saying that, then wonderful. But again, you get these moments where things aren't going so well. And in the beginning, you don't have a trust of your body anymore because you're thinking, well, it's let me down once and I'm terrified that I'm going to go back to where I was. But over a period of time, you realize that you've been there and you recognize the signs. And if you deal with it properly, you're going to be just fine.
I think that's also a very salient point because since we can't, sometimes when I work with a number of people who have been burned out or hit ball or whatever you want to call it. And a lot of the times they're thinking, what's wrong with me? Is there something broken? But, a mental injury is just like a physical injury. If I sprain my ankle quite severely, I'm not going to go running on it. I need to take time for it to heal. Mental injury is the same thing. Just because we can't see it, it is there. I mean, we can do neurological scans and such, and you can kind of feel it there. You can see how it shows up physiologically. But just because we can't see it and physically, well, we can actually physically feel it because we just don't have the or the mojo to pick ourselves up and go. I think what you're saying is reframing and giving new meaning to the position we are in at the time is to know that, this too shall pass. I will heal. I will come through this. This storm will pass. By adopting that type of thinking, it will get you back up on your knees. And I think everyone just needs time to recuperate. I don't care how strong or knowledgeable or experienced you are. I speak, obviously I come from a different world from you. You have an experience in yours, and mine comes from the clinical, cognitive, and neuroscience type of world, working with professionals such as yourself. But everyone I know maybe not always hit the proverbial wall as seriously, but everyone can feel a little depressed, can feel anxiety. And it's what I think what you're saying is so salient, Lucy, is that it's about taking the time, or would you say slowing it down, or taking it steady. Taking it steady. Thank you. Not taking it in stride. Taking it steady. But in such simple words, there's a deep elegance and there's a deep knowledge into that. And if we do slow things down for a while, it allows us to speed things up. I was wondering what currently in this new brave new world, this post-pandemic, with all the positives and negatives it's brought, what would you say are the three major things that you see in common that administrative professionals are focusing on right now or should start focusing on?
Coming out of the pandemic, I think getting the communication piece right, because I think, especially if they're not in an office with the executive all the time and they've been used to just popping their head round to ask a question, or the executive coming out and saying, oh, could you just handle this? It isn't working in the same way. So I think making sure that you have time aside to do that is core. I think, secondly, really understanding the business. Take the time to learn about the business, because most assistants know a lot about their businesses, but they don't necessarily understand it. And I keep saying to them, go be in leadership meetings. Go tell your executive you want to sit in leadership meetings so you understand what's coming up, so you can anticipate, because that moving forward is going to be what your role is, to look at where there are going to be bottlenecks, to look at what your executives agreed to do so you can keep them on track, to look at what your other executives in the room have agreed to do so you can keep them on track too, and to look at where there are things that are going to be a problem down the line so that you can anticipate that before it becomes a problem. And then finally, the third thing, I think it's learning what collaboration means, because collaboration is the new buzzword. And I was actually asked to put together a presentation on it. And when I started reading it, I came to the conclusion most of the journalists who'd written about it didn't have a clue what they were going on about. So I came up with a really easy scenario, and I hope you just give me a couple of seconds to do
Please,
this.
please.
So if I was putting on a play and I was doing teamwork, which is the old way of working before COVID hit, you would have people who were actors, and you would have stage managers, and you would have props people, and you would have lighting designers and sound engineers, but you would have a director, and the director is in control, because teamwork is all about control, and you don't necessarily have to like that person, but they are going to make sure that the play gets put on at the end and that everybody's happy. Everybody does their little bit, and that's it. Collaboration is totally different, because it's about thinking together as well as working together. So if you're taking my scenario of the play, everybody would arrive on the first morning, you would sit down and you would work out between you what was the best play you could possibly put on, bringing everybody's efforts into it. But you have to have a clear goal at the end of it in order to make that work, because otherwise it's chaos. But it is about trust and respect. It's about good communication skills. And it's about using everybody's skills to the best, but it's also about taking ego out of it and doing what's best for the business or what's best for the play. So whereas assistants used to be in a situation where it was very much a master and servant relationship, moving forwards, because everybody is telling me, and the things I'm reading are that we are going to come away from the 9 to 5. It's not going to be about sitting there for 9 to 5 and then therefore you're going to get paid. It's not going to be a place that we go work. It's going to be something that we do, and it's going to become far more goal orientated, so that they're going to be saying to you, what are your goals for this month? And as long as you hit them, it doesn't matter which hours you work to do that. So if it becomes that way, the world of collaboration becomes far, far more important. And as an assistant, particularly, although obviously it's relevant to people all over the workplace, but as an assistant particularly, because your role is dependent on the success of the person that you're working with, it becomes even more important that the two of you are on the same page and that you are collaborating properly.
Yeah, and as you said, this is all part of the same package. You've just sort of parsed it into 3 different elements. And collaboration, communication are the blood to any organization. It's the glue that holds together. But what I really liked you said, it was the second point also. I like the other ones, don't get me wrong, but I think the second point really kind of hit me. It's not, just don't know the business, understand the business. And what it sounds like, that may be a little different than what many professionals did before, but now they're asking, they're inviting themselves to these meetings. So they sit there as almost like a shadow participant, absorbing everything to understand the mechanics and how the cogs and the wheels work together. Is that what I understand?
Yes, because how can you possibly make your executive successful unless you understand what success looks like for them and you understand what their role is within the business and where it fits?
In the final part of our conversation, Lucy talks about the future of the administrative profession and how it is in flux. But it's in flux because of a number of different reasons, because of digitization, because of artificial intelligence, because of the pandemic and how it has shifted the landscape of the professional world. Now, Lucy talks about how the state or the role of the administrative assistant has always been in flux. But at this moment, with this confluence of technologies and AI and digitization and the post-pandemic, well, it's at a moment of an acute state of change. But that means that there's possibilities, there's new opportunities. And she speaks a lot to that, about how the future is looking bright for that world of professional administrators. Well, I'll leave it to Lucy to fill in the details. All right, Lucy, take it away.
If you look at the Future of Work report from the World Economic Forum, you will see very clearly how quickly digitalization and automation and things are taking over. If that bit goes, the role of the assistant, we know, is always in a state of flux. And at the moment, it's in the most acute state of change. It's like someone's taken a pack of playing cards and thrown them up in the air and we don't know where it's going to land. But we're in the process of creating what the new role looks like. And the thing that I know is that they are hugely adaptable. And in fact, if anybody is interested, there is a new skills matrix, a global skills matrix for the administrative profession, which is the first time there has ever been a career framework for administrative professionals. And I think that which is at globalskillsmatrix.com, is something that a lot of assistants and a lot of businesses, particularly the executives who want to understand how to use their assistants, actually, are going to find hugely useful, because it has 5 levels and it tells you at each level what skills they should have and what tasks they should be doing and what kind of behaviors you can expect. And then it gives you a progression so you can see right at the top level what they're capable of. And by the time you get to chief of staff, they're like a stunt double. They're managing the rhythm of the business, because obviously the CEOs are facing outwards, going out into the world to drive the business forward. The EA is managing the day-to-day office of the executive and making sure that their tasks are done and that they have got briefing papers and all the things that they need to go and do the things they need to do. But the chief of staff looks inward to the business and does the role of the CEO looking inwards. So it's very much looking at what everybody is got in terms of frustrations and where better processes can be put in place and how all that good stuff works. So that skills matrix has got everything from somebody who's starting at the business day one as an administrator all the way up to that chief of staff role.
And I think that's also very important, because if you have, as you call it, this skills matrix, it shows someone getting just fresh into the business, into the profession, how there's a progression, how they can move through the ranks, where before maybe it was a little sort of piecemeal. It's like, okay, do I hop here or do I hop here? But now it's telling, okay, these are the skills you have to develop as you progress through the levels. Is that, as I understand what you're saying?
Totally. And talking about stress and not knowing where you stand. I mean, I was talking to a business the other day who had thousands of assistants. And every single one of them was employed individually by the executive they reported into. There was no performance review. There was no structure for how they progressed in their career. It was all down to what their actual executive thought, as opposed to and so there was no way of comparing what any of them were doing. So we're in the process of trying to unravel that at the moment.
And that's the flux you're talking about, right? Is the deck of 52 cards that being thrown off, and how they land is what we need to deal with. And so, as you said, with the digitalization, with artificial intelligence, AI, and all the machine learning and everything that's kind of coming this virtual progression, this migration we're making, whether it's Teams, Zoom, or what have you, there's a number of things in flux that are affecting it. And so something like the skills matrix, that sets a level of certainty. Because I think what you're saying, Lucy, is I understand the DNA of our conversation right now. There's 3 things we try to nail down. It's a sense of certainty, which gives us, which the skills matrix is part of that. It's finding out control. And what I hear you saying is that these administrative professionals, they can take control. They can understand communication. They can invite themselves to these meetings to not just know the business, but to understand the nuts and bolts of what's going on. So they can be on top of things. And the third is to understand this redefinition of collaboration and what it means. And for these 3 points you've made, it's about, okay, let's take on ownership and responsibility. Let's not always just wait for the orders to come down the pipeline. Let me start leading. Let me manage upwards. Even though I have a boss, maybe I can manage him or her upwards to help them, to help myself. Is that what I understand? I mean, it's a complex ball here, but there's some basics, fundamentals.
Absolutely. And I think in the past, there has been a tendency to think 3 things, really. Firstly, that if I manage up, it is only when my executive isn't doing things properly. Or if I manage up, are they going to think that I think they're not doing their job properly? Or they deny the fact that they should be doing the role and leading up in their position, because it's easier to do that than to actually do the thing. So to me, it's a joy. I've had 3 amazing assistants in my life, and all 3 of them have totally changed my life. And the trust and respect is there to a point that I can tell you there was one occasion where I got to Heathrow Airport in my really mad year. Okay. And the woman behind the desk said to me, "Hello, Mrs. Brazier, where are you going today?" And I said, "I really don't know." And And I really didn't know, but I knew that the information would be in my travel pack, and I got it out and I said, Phoenix, that's where I'm going today. And she looked at me like I was totally insane, which at that point I probably was. But, that to me, the fact that they get on with filling my skills gaps and making sure that I'm where I'm meant to be at the right time, and that the people I'm communicating with, well, you've dealt with Fran recently, and I think you dealt with Matthew before that.
Yes.
They are all over it. And I just have to turn up and do what I'm really good at. And that is a joy. And it means that we can operate this business with 10 people with all the things that we do.
And I think that's very important, because this conversation might be a little aside than what you usually speak to, but I think speaking from your vulnerability, speaking from your experience and your knowledge about how to build resilience, how to shift mindsets, how to broaden the context, how to take ownership and responsibility with control and certainty, can give the administrative professionals, give them the reins back, a sense of that they can steer their own direction. And I think part of that, it's also understanding the passions of what is the reason you're in the business? What is it you want to achieve? Why do you show up every day, whether it's virtually or actually, in the office, as they say, IRL, in real life? And I think coming back and reflecting and sometimes just taking stock of what is driving you and what your drivers are can actually help to create a sense of steadiness, or have your feet on concrete. At least that's what I've seen in how we've communicated today. I see that you've had your shakes, and your climb to where you are right now, to the peak you are now, was not easy. You've taken your hits, but you've tried to understand and self-reflect, reframe, increase the context to where you've climbed, Lucy. And this is part, I guess, of what an administrative professional wants to be able to take on, to have that flexibility, that cognitive flexibility, is what I understand you're communicating.
Yeah, I think the assistants, for me, they resonate so much with me because I was that person for so long. And I think really they do the most wonderful job. And I'm going to sound like I'm name dropping now, but and I am probably. I was sitting having breakfast with Zelda Lakonji, who was Mandela's assistant, because she's patron of my foundation in South Africa. And she said to me, oh my goodness, Lucy, if you get this right, you're going to change the working lives of 500 million women. That's my why. And that isn't about me at all. It's always been about them. Always been about them. And I think that's a pretty good legacy if we get to that.
And one thing about this organization that you've created, or the top, through the magazine, through the publication, through the gatherings that you have, is that it spans not just the Western world, but as you say, I think your magazine has a publication of 130 countries, or maybe it's something like that.
Yeah, we sit occasionally and try and find countries where it isn't going, and that's more difficult than finding the ones that it is going.
Yeah, well, 130 is a pretty good track record, I tell you that. But the great thing is, obviously, it's men and women, but it's across cultures and across nationalities. And so I think that is also a very admirable thing, where we can talk about these things and strip away culture and strip away nationalities and just look at sort of the human being. What are the struggles they are facing? And there's a lot of commonalities and how we approach it. And it is sharing those tools and those stories and those skills to help create a more resilient organization, or more resilient individuals. And I think that's a great thing about your publication, or your organization's publication, is that it shares a lot of know-how, because a lot of the writers themselves, I think a majority of them are actually from the profession themselves.
Yes, they have been in the past, or they are now. So, when we first started it, the idea behind it was that the assistants weren't getting training at all. And so we figured that if we gathered together the top trainers in the world for assistants and put it into print, the HR departments would go, oh, this is a good cost-effective way of training the assistant. Let's buy it, which indeed is what happened. But that it wasn't the intention for it to be any more than that. And it has just grown totally organically. I have never had a business plan, ever. And I just tend to go where I'm sent. So wherever possible, say yes.
Organic is good sometimes. Organic is good. Let me ask you, now that we are several months into a post-pandemic world, we've migrated into a better reality. Thanks for that, Fate. What would you say, have you repurposed, or is there a redirection as to what Executive Support Magazine wants to deliver, or have you complemented with some new goals?
I think for us, because we were 2 weeks off our major conference in London just when the pandemic hit, I had very, very quickly to turn on a sixpence and to make sure that we were providing something for those people. But I could also see that just watching social media, and I've built the majority of my business through social media. I haven't really done any other marketing other than, obviously conversations like this. But I realized very quickly watching the assistants that they were really all at sea and they needed somebody to go, right, we've got you. And so I literally spent probably 2.5 years doing every podcast, every interview, every webinar that I possibly could, just to basically say, we're here. What do you need? And that was amazing. But I think it was June after COVID hitting in March that we put on our first online conference, and that was 552 people. And I did that from the front room of a house where we had only had internet put in the day before because we were in temporary accommodation because our house had gone and all our stuff was on its way to Spain. So I was still in London. So we did that one then. And then when we got to September, we did a second one, and that was over 1,000 people. And that side of our business has grown and grown and grown, and the reputation moved forward. So whereas I was doing events on 6 different continents a year and about 60 training sessions a year for myself, quite apart from going and speaking for everybody else, now we're doing 2 live ones a year and 2 online. And I am trying to cut down the amount of traveling I'm doing a bit, just because, I actually feel the business is far more secure now that I'm here more.
Yes.
Like everybody else, I guess we evaluated. And, I love it here in Spain. It's so beautiful. It really is just like a tiny corner of Spain that is so beautiful. We're about 100 meters from the sea. And so I did a big trip for a month to America, which was wonderful. I loved it. It was great seeing everybody and to reconnect and whatever. But for the first time ever, pretty much with this work, I came home and thought, oh, thank goodness, it's so nice to be home. So
I think that's for everybody to understand that, you can have busy weeks, but at some point we need to literally carve out time for ourselves to recharge, recollect, so we can get back into the game. And, you're busier than most people traveling to the States, for example, for a month, doing your talks and showing up at events and such. But it just goes to show you, someone who has burnt out years ago, I think it was 2018 you said, or something like that, or 2008?
2000 and 2010.
2010, I'm sorry, 2010, but you've taken that on board, you've learned from it, and you can still be busy, but it's to take that time to recuperate and just relax, and so you can get back into the game. I know you have an ES Global event coming up quite soon. I was wondering, what will the focus of that global event be for our listeners?
Oh, that event is 48 hours of continuous personal development. So it's 52 speakers, and then a month afterwards to catch up. But it is literally personal development, career development. And with all of our online events, it is a catch up on what's new since last year, really. It's the things that administrative professionals need to know in 2022 about what's happening with their role and the skills that they need to develop. And then later in the year, we have our tech event. And that came off the back of the first global, because after we did the first global, we went back and said, what do you need now? And overwhelmingly, they said, we have imposter syndrome because we think that our executives expect us to know everything about technology, and we don't have time to go and do the demos or anything else. So if we could just have an event which in one event told us all the tech stuff that we need to know since last year, that would be amazing. So that one's coming up in September as well. So all very exciting.
That's great. And I'll share that link in the podcast notes. I'm just respectful of your time, Lucy. I appreciate it. I was wondering, is there any last advice you would give to your tribe out there, those administrative professionals, that they can carry, that they can put in their backpack, and as they move forward further into 2022 and into 2023?
I think the advice that I would give them now is that you shall and you will and you must take this opportunity to show them what you're made of. It is a time when we are in this acute state of change. I'm not suggesting that you go and you burn yourself out. And I know that most of you have got far too much work to do. But this is the time to be looking at doing things in a more business-like, in a more strategic way, and to start getting yourself into a mindset where you are part of the business. You're not sat outside of it, because that is what the future of the profession is going to be.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for your sharing your wisdom, your experience, and sharing your vulnerability. And, I think that's so important when people are feeling on the edge, that, even people at the top of their profession have felt that. And even though where you got was not an easy sojourn, it was about resetting your mindset, broadening the context, and redefining how you moved along that road as you moved upwards. So thank you again, Lucy, very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason.
We'll talk soon.
We will.
Well, that brings us to an end of another episode. I would really like to send a big thank you out to Lucy Brazier, OBE, again, for her time, sharing her vulnerability, her knowledge, her wisdom, her experience. To all you professional administrators out there, and there is a hell of a lot of you. You guys, you gals are the glue, the linchpin that holds organizations together. Although underappreciated, I hope you are more and more appreciated for your efforts, your hard work, and your diligence. And I think you wholeheartedly deserve it. And I don't just speak that lightly. I've worked with many of you over the last 10 years, and I've seen how the profession has evolved. Anyways, thank you again, Lucy, and I hope we get to speak again soon. I will leave all her contact information and her social media links in the podcast notes. Well, folks, that's the end of another episode. Here we are. As usual, please recommend, rate, subscribe, suggest, and any other verb you think would help this podcast get out there to people who might enjoy the content. Well, until next week, until next episode, I hope you keep well, keep strong, and we'll speak soon.